Hello, everybody. We are live today at noon. We're so glad that you all can tune in today for our second discussion as we continue to seek to expose you to different people, different organizations, different businesses. Our job is to educate you as much as possible. I love hearing different perspectives and talking to different people, people I agree with, people I don't agree with. I enjoy all of it. So we're so glad you guys can tune in today and come into the conversation. As always, we ask that you would please share as much as possible. Let people know that we are on today. Share. Whether you're on YouTube, Periscope, Facebook. I'm going to introduce our guest in a minute. I just want you guys to share, as you always do, shout us out. We want to thank everybody who watched our midweek gathering last night and continue to support everything that we do online here at Bethany. And Matt, I did share it on Twitter, so if you go on my page, you'll see it on there. You can retweet it if you get a chance to.
Yeah, you doing it right now.
Cool. Thank you. So we want to reach as many people. We have people from the UK that join on, people all around the United States, Africa, India, a few other places that join us, and we thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited about today and our guest. I think I've known Matt for a few years now. Wow, I don't even remember. We met at the Executive Pastor Conference.
Right. I think it's it might be like going on 8 years now.
Yeah. Because I think that's when we met in the conference room downstairs, and we did the interview on church safety. I think that was it, because David had me in there with you and a couple other people.
That's right. So that might even be like 10 years.
Wow. Yeah, it's been a minute. I hope I say your last name right. Matt Bronner?
That's okay. Yeah, it's Branagh.
Branagh. Sorry, okay, Matt Branagh.
That's okay.
Yeah, Matt Branagh. He is the editor at Christianity Today, Church Law and Tax Side. And we're going to talk to him about editing, writing. So y'all do us a favor and share as much as possible. Ask your questions. Matt will be here to answer your questions. Ask. Ask as much as possible. We got about an hour with us as we talk about editing, writing, magazines. I want to jump into the online versus print conversation and how writing is changing because of Twitter. Maybe we can start there a little bit. But before we get there, again, thank you all for coming on, sharing with us. And what I'll do is, as people are coming on, Matt, why don't you introduce yourself, tell people who you are, where you're from, whatever you want to share.
Okay.
Throw that out there.
Okay, great. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for having me. And it's really great to be a part of what you're doing here with your church. And obviously, knowing you for so many years, love and respect the work that you do. I think what Bethany Baptist Church is doing really outstanding too. And so to be connected with you and collaborating with you is a real privilege for me. So just kind of as the opening remark, wanted to share that. My background is almost entirely in the publishing realm. So I'm in my mid 40s, and I actually started all the way back when I was 15. I went down to the local county newspaper in suburban Denver, where I grew up, and asked the sports editor if I could do coverage of high school athletics. And he was crazy enough to say yes, because as I look back now, I was terrible. I had no experience. I mean, I knew sports because I grew up watching sports, but covering sports is much different from watching it. And I was pretty bad, but he was gracious. He gave me the opportunity, paid me $10 a story, and I just was thrilled. Like it was something that I loved doing. Getting my first article in print, seeing my byline was just a really gratifying experience, and I was hooked from that point forward. And so all through high school, college, and beyond, I've been, excuse me, I've been focused in journalism and publishing, and haven't looked back. So I studied it in school. I got a degree in journalism and public policy, and then immediately started my career in newspapers. Worked at a daily newspaper for a number of years, and covered business, and learned a lot about small business, banking, technology, you name it. I did a lot of coverage of the economy, and so that was kind of my early start, was in newspapers, and it's been both a blessing and a curse, especially watching as the newspaper industry has died such a slow and painful death, and yet there are signs too of maybe possibility, but it's tough. It's very tough. So that's at least a little bit about me as far as getting started in my career. As you noted, I work now for Christianity Today, and that's kind of an interesting story in and of itself, but came aboard and moved into their church law and tax area and became content editor for that team. That all started about 13 years ago. And I just have continued in that role. Grateful for the opportunity. I get to work remotely. I live in the state of Maine. Even though Christianity Today is based in Chicago. So they give me the opportunity to live out of state, which is great. My wife and I, we've been married for almost 20 years, and we have 3 kids, and we get to live fairly close to my wife's family, which has been a real blessing for us. And so I get to do work in a place that's really great, and get to live in a place that's really great.
Cool. Good. So you brought something up that I thought was interesting. This is, I guess we'll go out of order, but we'll jump on this first. So long form reading, like it used to be, is somewhat, like you said, gone by the wayside. So how has social media affected how information goes out? Because we seem to reduce everything. We think we can learn about a topic in 140, 200 characters. So, before my grandparents, I'll see my grandfather, breakfast, newspaper route, and he would read. I mean, now you go to Twitter for your news, but I really don't think social media is your best place for news. So talk to us about that real quick, if you can, and how the industry is making those adjustments.
Right. Yeah. It's, you're touching on a really important dynamic. And as I kind of look back and evaluate how things have trended or evolved, I think I could actually go back even further when you look at the advent of cable news. So kind of the late 80s, early 90s, you may remember this, but I was in, I think, junior high when the first Gulf War erupted, and we invaded Iraq after they had invaded Kuwait. And there was the sort of that CNN moment of seeing all of this kind of unfold before us. And I think of that as a real defining moment, because that became sort of the 24/7 news cycle dynamic. And it also became the era of the soundbite. What's the one thing that can be said and grabbed and then used for better or for worse, out of the day's news. And so that dynamic sort of started to move us into that trend of not maybe thinking deeply about things, but just wanting to be informed and being guided, again, for better or worse, by a lot of those snippets, sound bites, etc. Social media just sort of took that and amplified it. So The difference being, of course, that now instead of hearing from a certain group of people who want to share those sound bites, now everybody has that opportunity.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that sort of like reverses the roles now in that regard. You don't necessarily get news now. You get analysis.
Right.
You get opinion.
Right.
And it's hard to differentiate where's the news, what's the facts of the matter, and what's the analysis or spin.
Right.
And that's what social media has brought for us, is that dynamic.
So basically, you're admitting that we're getting played somewhat. We shape or form.
I think there's a couple of important things. I think you hear a lot about the bias in media coverage, right? Kind of slanting one way politically or another. I think that's true because as human beings, we're innately biased. We're going to have our own perspectives. We're going to have our own life experiences, our own opinions. And setting those aside completely in order to be objective and covering something, I think there are some who do that really well and can carry themselves professionally to do that. But even the best of us are going to struggle still without letting some of that creep in.
Absolutely.
And so that's, I think that's very true as far as being played from a media bias standpoint. We're also played now because of that whole dynamic of what I'm sharing with you is news, but it's really my opinion about the news.
Right.
And if you're not careful about discerning what you're hearing and from who, it's very easy to be taken into that. And I'll just say, as someone who's worked in this profession for 20 plus years, I get caught up in that.
Sure.
It's very easy to succumb to it. My wife and I have talked about that even recently, that, there are times where I'll read something and I'll be like, I can't believe this. And I'll start to talk about it. And she say, well, where did you hear that? And it's like, that's a great point. I need to go back and really make sure I've got my facts straight before I get really opinionated about it and then share it out beyond in Facebook or Twitter feeds or whatnot.
Okay, that's good. So with that in mind, for those people that want to break into the industry, with all that you just said, because now help me out here with this. I'll start it this way. I'm a preacher. You're used to us by now, so I get the clickbait thing. So they put the headline up, and when you read the story has nothing to do with the headline that's put up. And I guess the more clicks you get, the more money is generated from ads and stuff, correct? Is that how it works?
So it depends. And the publishing models have actually evolved pretty rapidly over the last 10 years. So advertisers are not so convinced about just the pay-per-click kinds of dynamics, especially on general news sites. So that's changed quite a bit. But there are still kind of clickbait types of services that are out there. Where I see it mostly is on general news sites that run ads that look like news. And have things that you want to click on that look really enticing, and then you click on it and then it ends up being something different. So there is that dynamic. But what I think has become more of the model, but still speaks to the dynamic you're touching on, is I have my sort of perspective review of the world. I'm going to create or build a news environment for that. And then I'm going to bring others into my realm as members. And that I think has sort of that echo chamber effect that you'll hear people talk about. That's what I think we're starting to see more of, is I'll build my kind of website for my tribe, and then I'll get other people to come in. And then there's a bunch of us here, and we all look and sound the same, and we see the news the same way, and we get the news the same way. And so I think that's a little bit more of what you're starting to see as far as that's concerned. And that can have its own detrimental effects, like you've said, where you get a lot of headlines that start to feel really sensationalistic, maybe a little bit misleading, people clicking on it, sharing it, and so on, just because they identify with that particular source and they say, oh, well, I know them. I'm part of that group. I'm going to go share that now. Even if I didn't even read what they're posting, I'm going to share it.
Yeah. That's interesting because it was leading into my next question of if somebody wants to break into the writing industry, whether it's news, magazines, writing a book, especially those people like me that really don't like writing. I'd rather talk it than write it.
Okay.
But for those that want to break in, so I'm a new writer, and I ask you, what give me some advice on this industry, how to write, whatever. I'm a complete novice. What would you tell me to help our audience out, especially for those people that want to break into this industry?
Sure. That's a great question, and it's a complex question, and I'll see if I can give a very genuine upfront answer that can give some good tools that people can use right away. So the first thing I would really advocate is for people to learn and develop their craft. So if you feel like you have a gift of writing, if you feel like that's something that you're being called to do, or if you're also maybe thinking I'm gifted as an editor and want to become an editor by profession, that's a very attainable but difficult skill or set of skills to master. So you want to really work to learn and educate yourself on those skills and practice those skills and be doing that intentionally on an ongoing basis. That's sort of like the first thing, because there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, I want to write a book, or I want to write, and that's good. It's good that they might have that idea or that inspiration, but it is a very intentional process that you have to follow in order to actually realize that idea or see it come to fruition. So that requires a lot of practice, a lot of hard work. And I think that's kind of a sobering reality, but it's also an encouraging reality, I think, because it means just like if you're going to train for a marathon, you're going to do all of the work that goes into running that marathon. Everything's on you. You are the one that's going to dictate your schedule, your hours, the training that you're going to go through, everything that is required to become skilled enough to run that marathon and complete it is, all within your control.
Okay.
And so to that extent, I think that's actually really encouraging. You can dictate your abilities to become as strong of a writer or as an editor as you can.
Okay.
The second part's the harder part. No, I shouldn't say the harder part. It's equally hard, I think. And that is, it requires a lot of networking.
Okay.
You've got to really build relationships with people who are in the profession, whether it's book publishers, web publishers, magazine publishers, whatever the case may be. You've got to build a lot of relationships. And that can be really hard if you don't already know people or are connected into that profession. That can be really daunting. And that's where that can be discouraging, because whereas with the writing and editing skills, you control that.
Right.
Your networks, that goes a little bit beyond your control. And so how do you develop that? And I have some ideas for how that can go. Okay. But that's slow at times, and that can be hard.
Okay.
So, but it's sort of this kind of two-pronged approach. Refine your craft, become really strong as a writer and editor, and then also really become intentional about meeting people and networking with people that can start to help you figure out doors that you want to open.
Okay.
And probably a quick side note, third thing would be just to become a really voracious reader. Just be reading a lot, because reading can really improve your writing and editing.
Yes.
It also makes you much more aware of the world around you and what's going on and what you want to speak into what's going on.
Sure.
So that's kind of a quick aside.
Okay. So do you think we're seeing a lot of people do more blogs? Do you think that plays? Because like I know somebody whose child is making a couple $1,000s a month. I mean, thousands of dollars a month just by blogging, by the ad space, just getting their stuff out there, writing consistently. until they had so many viewers come to their site that these people are buying ad space. And, you know, to me, you know, that's a wonderful trait to just put out a bunch of, you know, your thoughts, as you said, your opinion, and then have people pay you $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month, you know, some people $10,000 a month just to come on, you know, to purchase space on your page. So is that affecting the magazine world? Because you see so many blogs, you see so many people independently doing self-publishing. Does that play a role in this, or do you see that as a great thing? Because now you have so many lanes that are opened up, if I can say it like that, for people to showcase their abilities.
Right, right. Yeah, I think first off, I think self-publishing is largely a positive thing.
Okay.
I think it's democratized the ability for people to get discovered in a way that 20 years ago they couldn't, because there were always certain gatekeepers that decided who got in and who didn't.
Okay.
So I think that's really positive in that regard. With that said, I think what's hard with self-publishing is you have the opportunity to say what you want, but you don't necessarily have a lot of control over who ends up seeing it.
Okay, sure.
So sometimes platform becomes a really strong dictator as far as who gets discovered and who doesn't.
Right.
So whereas before you had gatekeepers who decided who got to say what, now it's more a function of there's so much out there. How are you going to stand out amidst this immense crowd of voices?
Right.
So that's where the networking part can become really important again, is getting your blog, let's say, discovered by people who can use their platforms to draw attention to you. And again, that's where that intentional relationship building is going to be really, really valuable. So self-publishing can be a viable way. I think it's really positive, but it can be a real challenge to establish yourself and do, as you've described here with at least one of these individuals, to create that kind of consistent monthly income stream. That's a pretty difficult thing to develop. Sure. Now, that said, there can be success cases like the one you've described. And what I found is that those typically emerge because of a certain niche that person can speak into, and they can speak into it really well, and it resonates. And so, and then it's not just a blog, they've got a really, strong presence suddenly on social media, and they start a podcast. And, it kind of has that domino effect that it then creates that platform or that reach.
Right.
And that's where it can suddenly, take off. But that's usually very niche driven.
Sure.
And you've got to find something like that really resonates in your own kind of hobbies or passions that can, bring that intersection of topic and interest and ability to speak into that interest.
Yeah. I think that's the one good thing about, honestly, sometimes the internet can be a cesspool, but I think that's the one cool thing about the internet now is there's so many ways you can make money and get in with, like you said, outside of the traditional gatekeeper method. Because somebody in the comments section put up that, now you're an editor, so you help speak to this more. She said that, publishers get to decide, what can be changed about your book, versus self-publishing, you get to write what you want. So it's like a movie. If I write a movie script and Universal buys it, they own the picture now. So they have a right to they're putting the money up certain edits to it. Versus now you're seeing people online saying, I'm not going to go that route because I want to be genuine to what my art is. So to me, there seems like it's a sacrifice on both sides.
It can be. Yeah, it definitely can be. I think keep in mind there are, there are a variety of publishers out there. My advice to, and I see Elizabeth's comment here, and I think she's exactly right. I think that's a trade-off that sometimes pushes people out of their comfort zones. They don't want to go down that path.
Yeah.
I would say this: if you are looking to try and extend your platform and you've got a body of work that you can show to a publisher, you don't have to just work with that one publisher that you first come across. You can take the time and effort to try and go out and dialogue with a number of publishers and get to know them. And in my own experience, one of the things that I try to do when I'm working with writers in particular is I try to develop a rapport, a relationship with them that is very much collaborative.
Sure.
And, recognizes that I have something that I want to publish of theirs, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to look at it. And I know that there's things that do need to be edited because it may be for style purposes. It may be because certain points that really need to be drawn out are kind of buried and need to get amplified, or maybe there's a lot of material that's unnecessary that just needs to get cut or needs to be reshaped. And that's the skills that I have as an editor that I bring to the relationship that I think can be beneficial to the writer. And I want them to understand that. With that said, I'm not a dictator. Right. I want to do that in collaboration and in relationship with that writer, so that they come to a point where they say, I see what you're saying. Well, yeah, if I move this here and I bring this up there, get a little excited. But if I make the changes that you're describing, I can see where this now becomes a better experience, a better outcome. Then both sides win. And that in the end, I think is beneficial for the piece that's being worked on, whether it's an article or a book. And presumably you get more readers and the platform expands and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. That's cool. So I mean, you're right, it's a trade-off. Somebody like you who's been in the business for almost 30 years now, you know a whole lot more than I do. So if I write an article for Christianity Today and you say, Nick, this is great, but we need to make some adjustments here. It's kind of hard for me to, I can advocate and say, I want to keep this in, but how can we make it work? But you're the editor of the magazine. If something's printed from the magazine that gets a lot of disagreement, they're going to come to you guys more than they're going to come to me. So you guys have to protect your brand as much as I got to protect mine too.
Sure. Well, and it depends on the type of piece, right? Like if we're talking about more of a general news article that is fact checked and, that there's a little bit more of a, it's a little bit more of an objective kind of process. If we're talking about a commentary, like an opinion piece, there's probably a little bit more deference to the writer because that's coming, that's their perspective that they're trying to draw out. And the editor's still there to help them draw that out.
Okay.
That's important. But there's probably a little bit more of a, an understanding on the publisher's part that, there could be some controversy here. And we want controversy for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. Right. But we're not going to necessarily shy away from controversy because this is the author's perspective.
Sure.
And we're wanting to bring that perspective in front of our readers.
Okay.
So process might be a little bit different, based on the type of piece.
Okay, cool. We got a few questions. I'm gonna put these up, then we'll pick up the conversation some more. So, do you get royalties for your article in a magazine or a one-time check? Or is it just, hey, you write it and it's free? How does that work out?
Right. Well, I'll start by saying anybody that tells you, hey, I want you to write for me and I can't pay you, but you're going to get great exposure, I always look at that as a red flag. And the reason I say that is because a lot of times they're looking for content to populate their site and they want a lot of content.
Yeah. And
once they're done with you, they kind of move on to the next thing. And if they have the traffic, great, but you might end up getting buried anyway.
Right.
And more importantly, it's your creative work, it's your intellectual property, and you put your time and energy and sweat into it. And so, you deserve some kind of compensation for that, in my opinion. So, so be careful of promises of lots of exposure, even though they can't pay you. And there could be time and place where that actually does work for you. So I'm not saying that that's all bad, but just be cautious.
Yeah. Well, like if Oprah comes to you and says, "I'm gonna put you in my magazine," you know, then that makes sense. You know.
That's right. That's right. You got to evaluate the opportunity. Who is it you're talking with? But I say that, and even with the big players, don't necessarily let yourself get taken advantage of.
Absolutely.
But as far as how compensation works, it varies by publication and website. And that's a conversation you just want to have up front with the publisher. And so like in my world with church law and tax, we just pay on a straight, flat amount that we agree upon up front with the writer.
Sure.
And we typically base that on the number of words that will be published.
Okay.
And sometimes there can be some back and forth, and if the writer's looking for more money, maybe there's some additional material they can go and get as a part of the piece, or they can do a second sidebar piece that relates to the first piece, and we can pay a little bit more as a result. So there's some back and forth, there's some negotiation, and I think as writers, I highly encourage you to just to be upfront about what you're looking for and how you want to dialogue about that, and expect that the publisher should be forthright with you about what they're going to compensate. And if you feel like it's a fair amount, great. Make sure you have it in writing, so you just have that record, and it can still just be in an email. It doesn't have to be an official contract.
Sure.
But just have that so that you can reference it down the road and make sure that they follow through the way that they say that they will.
Okay.
There's really rarely any kind of royalty structures for articles. Typically get into that more with books.
Yeah.
And publishers, again, vary in how they do that. Some publishers pay what we call an advance, and it kind of compensates the writer up front as they work on the book, and then they turn around and submit their manuscript, and then they get a little bit of a percentage of sales after the book becomes published and starts selling. Some publishers, they can't pay advances, but they agree to a larger share of the royalty.
Sure.
So you work for free, so to speak, up front, but then you benefit on the back end with the sales, presuming the book sells well and that kind of thing. Again, you just want to be clear up front and talking with the publisher about what they do, why they do it, how they do it, and then make sure it makes sense for you and works for you.
Cool. That's good. And get yourself a good entertainment lawyer too. We have some people that help us out. So I got another question. So copywriting. So if I write an article for a magazine, right? Can I use that same, if it's my material and you publish it in CT, can I use that somewhere else, or is that strictly for CT? I'll ask it like that. Okay.
So in a minute ago, I said, don't necessarily need an official contract. At some point you do. You want some kind of an agreement about the piece. I was thinking more so along the lines of in those early dialogues about what will you pay?
Sure.
Even if it's an email, that's okay. But at some point you do need to have an agreement that just says, here's what we're doing. Here's what the publisher's receiving. Here's what the author is giving, and here's the deadline, and here's the kind of expected length, that kind of thing. As far as copyright, so with the pieces that we commission with Church Law and Tax, we set up what we call is a non-exclusive agreement.
Okay.
And what that means is, as the publisher, I'm going to receive your piece, and I have rights to use it exclusively on our site for a set period of time, and I'm paying you to use that.
Okay.
And then after that time expires, you're then free to take that to other publishers.
Okay.
And you can have it published by others. And you still retain the rights without any time lapse. To use it on your own personal site. So you could write that article for us, and you can still put it on your own, personal website. That's fine. Like, we get that. We just don't want it to be used on our site, but then also somebody who maybe competes with us the very next day. That sort of kind of dilutes the value, so to speak, for us. So that's sort of a give and take that we work through with the writer up front. But your material is your material, and you want to make sure when you're talking with a publisher that you don't sign an agreement that gives them exclusive rights to it. Okay. Now that's on the article side. Book side can be a little bit different. There can be other parameters that come into play, especially as far as exclusivity is concerned. Usually what happens is it is exclusive for the duration of the agreement, unless and until the sales of the book fall below a certain threshold, and then it's considered out of print. And then at that point, the rights revert back to you, and you can go and do with it as you please, and so on and so forth. But a little bit different dynamics and probably more detail than you need here, but it just gives you at least a sense of the things that you want to spell out up front.
That's good. Yeah, do you do book publishing also, or you're just, I mean, do you know anything about, because we have some people asking questions about books. Do you know anything about book editing and book publishing, or you're just more on the magazine side?
So my experience is more on the journalism side, so magazines, websites, but I have some experience on the book side. We do publish some books with Church Law and Tax, and so I have some familiarity there with it, but I'm not well versed in a lot of the traditional, like the book publishing world, Simon and Schuster, the big book deals. I'm not going to be as, familiar as far as like how that works. I know somebody here in the stream is asking, are there people that help you negotiate, like a book contract, that kind of thing? There are actual book agents. Yeah. Kind of the same way that you have agents in the sports world or in the entertainment world. There are agents that can represent you for those kinds of negotiations with a book publisher. It's probably not something you would necessarily engage until you maybe establish yourself in some way and start to know and have a better feel for what you're looking for. And the stakes are getting higher and higher. Yeah. But they are out there, and you can even do a little bit of networking to try and connect into that world and learn a little bit and see if there's people out there who are willing to help you learn a little bit as you're getting established.
Okay. That's good. And for those that are writing books, Bishop is going to do a book writing seminar, and he's going to have a publisher help out with it too. So if you don't get your question answered about the book today, we're working on that now. He probably will. He has like Matt said, an agent, entertainment people that can help you with that. But that'll all be in the book writing seminar that he's going to do. Another good question. I took a class in high school on creative writing. I cannot remember the books or most of what we was taught. I've been out of school for 20 years this year. Oh my goodness. So, but I mean, I'm not that old, but still, but any good books you can suggest for like creative writing? I know that's kind of a broad question, but any articles or anything you could think of?
Well, so there are, especially on the journalism side of things, I've got a number of editorial ideas, books, helping refining the craft, so to speak. Probably the one that has been the most influential to me has been a book by a gentleman by the name of Bill Blundell. And the book is called The Art and Craft of Feature Writing. And Bill Blundell was the editor for features at the Wall Street Journal for a number of years. And the book is actually very enjoyable to read. And it has a lot of really practical insight on how to go about writing features. Now, that's again more on the journalism side of things, not the creative writing side of things. And I'm not as well versed in that regard, but a couple of things do come to mind that I can share here with everyone. One is a book by, there's an author who I have come to know and love, who's a little bit more in the creative realm. Her name is Anne Lamott. Okay. And last name is Lamott. She's got a book called Bird by Bird. And it is a little bit more on the creative writing side of things. And it's basically talking about going through that creative process. Okay. And like and she uses a little bit of language, so I should just caution you up front.
Yeah.
But she's got a chapter, and I'll edit it here for our purposes, but basically it talks about writing really crummy first drafts.
Okay.
And why that's like so important. Like people think, well, I got to get it right. I got to get it perfect the first time. And they start and then they stop because it's like, oh, it's not going the way I want it to. And then they start again and they stop. And her whole premise with that chapter is write the chapter, like get it down.
Yes.
And then go through that process of refining and pruning and cleaning. And then through that, you actually find new opportunities to create and you start to build. And it just kind of takes on a life of its own from there. So it's Lamott. I see someone asking how to spell Lamott.
OTT. Okay. I'll put one. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, and the book's called Bird Word. So that's a great one. I love that. There's also, and this kind of goes into that realm of networking. I kind of mentioned this earlier. There's a group that is, and I think this would be, especially if I kind of understand the audience here a little bit. There's a group that's devoted to trying to help, especially people of color, get their books published.
Okay.
And it's called Publishing in Color. Their website's just publishingincolor.com. And then they've got another website called writingforyourlife.com. And they do a lot of resources on their site, trying to help people with developing skills. Also a lot of events. Of course, right now, a lot of it's virtual, but they'll do typically a lot of conferences, a lot of regional events. In fact, I went to one in New Jersey a couple of years ago.
Okay.
The publishingincolor.com website and the writingforyourlife.com website, really helpful because it gives a lot of tips, a lot of guidance, a lot of encouragement, a lot of networking. And then there's also sort of this element to it that tries to introduce authors to decision makers with different publishers, tries to like become that gateway to get people introduced and gets them interacting and networking together.
Okay. That's good.
So, and again, that's not just on the journalism side of things where I'm maybe a little bit more well-versed. There's a lot there on the creative writing side, how to get connected in with publishers that are dealing with creative works. So I highly recommend both of those sites. And the gentleman that started that, his name is Brian Elaine. Brian's a great guy. I'm actually connected to him. If there's anybody that wants to meet him directly and try to get integrated as far as those organizations are concerned, let me know. And I can give that info to Nicholas to pass along if that's helpful.
What's his last name again? Brian what?
Last name is Elaine. I think it's Allain. Actually, I can tell you here.
Put in the comment section. So you guys get these resources, y'all. He just shared on some websites or they're in the comment section, some books. Pick them up. But Matt, you're right. I saw somebody that we assume that people that write love it all the time, number one. Number two, it's always easy for them. But as I'm on Twitter and I follow some writers, they lament so much about the writing process. And you're right. Somebody just said, you want to learn how to write a book or write a magazine or a blog. Guess what your first thing you should start doing is write. Just let your first draft be complete trash. Just get it on paper and then work it from there. Like I suffer from that because as I write, I feel like I sound stupid. I'm like, my thoughts aren't really coming out the way I want them to. But the more I write, I get a little better at it, but then go back and revise it later. So if you just want to start writing, y'all, just start writing. It can sound completely like mush. Just write and go back and work on it later.
That's exactly right. It's what we call our inner critic, right? We start to write and then we automatically start to evaluate, and we allow that inner critic to influence our activity, and usually for the negative. And it's learning how to silence that inner critic and just allow yourself to press forward. There's actually a really great TED Talk on this, and I'm going to see if I can pull up the link here and track it down. But basically, what was she the author of? It was a woman that was the author of some. Oh, it's the woman that wrote the book Eat, Pray, Love,
Okay.
and she talks about success, failure, and the drive to keep creating, and it basically boils down to silencing that inner critic
Okay.
and tapping into what we know as well, as the Greeks would refer to it as sort of the muse that's
Okay.
in the room, and using that to help shape the creativity that you're trying to get down on paper.
Okay.
I just found the link. I'll send it to you, and then you can share it out to everyone here.
Cool.
It really is a great talk. I actually just listened to it last fall, and it really inspired me and even kind of jolted a little bit of creativity for me in that season.
Okay. That's good. I'm trying to find this one question. I've learned from talking to some authors that all editors aren't created equal, and they've had to change. They started with one and had to change to somebody else, because the editor just couldn't get their voice, and then somebody else came in and found it, discovered it, and helped them get it done. Talk to us about that. Choosing. Somebody asked, how do you choose the right editor? How's that relationship work out? Like you said, you see it as a relationship thing. We're working together to get this out.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, you don't always have a choice, right? Because you might work with a publisher, and then that editor gets assigned to you, and that's just you got to work with it one way or the other, and so that can be a challenging thing at times. I think that like in a perfect world, in an ideal situation, you're going to have someone who's amenable to a lot of back and forth, a lot of give and take during the editorial process. I'm sorry, the editing process.
Okay.
So it's just having open and frank dialogue about what your vision is for the project, and then hearing that editor's vision for the project, and through that conversation, finding the common ground. What are the things that you already agree upon that you can build upon?
Okay.
And then where you're differing, kind of working through that and understanding, is the difference significant enough that one side or the other is going to have to compromise in a way that maybe they don't love, but they're going to have to be in order for the project to move forward.
Sure.
And then looking at that and making sure both sides feel like they can remain genuine to themselves and the project by doing so. Again, that's in the ideal world. It doesn't always go very well, but that's the kind of dialogue that you want to have.
Okay.
And hopefully you're in relationship with that editor enough over time to where that can become a very natural part of the working relationship. Like in Church Law and Tax, we've got a couple of different individuals who have written some books for us. And the first book is always the bumpiest. Okay. It's a lot of it's kind of like just getting to know each other and a lot of just trying to understand communication style. Like those things just you take for granted after you've done a couple of books with that person, because now you know how they work and how they communicate, and they know how you work and how you communicate. But that's all about relationship. And so again, it goes back to what I had said earlier, which is if you can do a lot of due diligence, a lot of homework up front, interviewing the publisher, so to speak, trying to get to know them, understand how they work, who you'd be working with, who they are, getting to know them. I mean, that would be ideal if you could do that. Again, it's not always realistic, and it doesn't always work out perfectly that way, but that's certainly at least sort of like a foundation that you want to try and work from.
Okay, that's good. So let's talk about this real quick. Thank you all for all the questions. That came in like an onslaught. We put all the book recommendations, the websites, the TED Talk, all of them are in the comments. So go back through the comments after this is over, click on everything. We're trying to get you the best information possible. So Matt, every year at the XP conference, you interview a bunch of XPs. So talk to us about that process, because you interview the person and then you have to quote them. You can't misquote them. Right. And you can't put everything in there that the person says. How do you navigate that? Like, do you want to some people may come back and say, well, you only said this, but you missed all this whole other part that I said. Have you ever had that happen? Talk to us about that process of editing, of interviewing somebody, and then having to write that and publish it for the public.
Right. It goes back to some extent to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is it's a skill. It takes a lot of practice, and you will fail. And I learned that very early on in my newspaper career. No matter how hard I tried to interview as many people on a topic, capture their quotes correctly, write them into the article as fairly as possible, for every one article I did where that worked out well, there was 4 more where it was like somebody wasn't quite happy, or everybody quoted in the article was happy, but all the readers contacted me to say, well, you didn't talk to so-and-so, or you didn't even look at this issue, or, it's an imperfect process. And I think that with time and practice, you get better at it.
Okay.
And you start to understand, well, if I'm going to talk about this issue, I need to make sure I talk to this kind of type of person or this group of people to be a part of that and to accurately reflect what's going on.
Okay.
With what you're describing, the roundtables, those are fun because that's an opportunity for me to learn and to hear from them about what are the pain points that they're facing in their roles as executive pastors. And that can really shape and drive the kinds of articles that we want to go out and create over the next year over on church law and tax. So a lot of what I learn, I don't necessarily end up publishing. Okay. It's a little bit more research oriented or investigative oriented and behind the scenes oriented. That said, there are times where we'll talk about a topic that we end up writing about.
Okay. And
in that instance, what I try to do, and this is a fine line because there's some journalistic ethics involved here. What I try to do is I try to capture and we record those sessions. So I have audio. So I can go back and transcribe and make sure I get word for word, everything correct. And then I go back to that person. I say, this is what I have you saying, and I'm putting it into the article for this. And if they object and say, well, I didn't say that, you can say, well, here's what I have. I went back to the recording and this is what you said. Yeah. And if they're like, oh, okay, well, I said that. Well, what I really meant was, or, oh, well, yeah, I said that, but that's in relation to this other aspect that needs to be mentioned as a part of that. Mm-hmm. Then for me as an editor, as a writer, as a journalist, it's incumbent on me to then decide how am I going to use what I already have from them in relation to now what I've gotten from them in the subsequent conversation. And that can be tricky because sometimes somebody says something honestly up front and then they think about it and they're like, well, I don't know, that was probably too honest. I don't know if I should say that. But to the reader, that's really important. Yeah. And I have a responsibility as a journalist to represent the truth as much as I can or as best as I can. So there's a fine line that you have to navigate. Fortunately, a lot of times the conversations I have where I share what's been quoted tend to go really positively. And it's just more about some clarification that helps set up that quote and make sure it's represented accurately. Yeah. And that to me is a better win and a better outcome anyway. It helps the reader understand reality better. So I don't know if that helps.
No, it does. No, it does.
But it is very much it's a skill that's acquired. It takes a lot of time. And even after many years of experience, it's still prone to not succeed or succeed as well as I would like.
Well, I noticed how careful you are in those roundtables. I mean, you're paying attention hard. I don't say a lot, but I observe a lot. And I noticed like you're very meticulous about even your questions too. As you ask us different things to get information, you can tell you've been doing it for a long time. I do have a question because we got to close in like 6 minutes because I got to go run and get my kids too. I call this era the outrage culture. Everybody's mad at something. Now let's take away the pandemic. Let's take away the social injustice that's going on now and all that. And let's just talk about how life was even before 2020. Online, everybody's mad at something. every day. It's like you tune in and it's like, what got y'all mad today? And I think sometimes we let the social media outrage, when it's positive when it's positive, but it's negative when it's negative, and we let a bunch of people that either A, aren't that informed, B, don't shop at the places that they want to cancel, C, don't read to people that they don't even read anyway, D, don't listen to the music of people they don't listen to anyway. I'm basically asserting it almost seems like you can't please everybody. Somebody's going to be upset about something because for some strange reason, we're going full circle. It's that silo thing. If you print something that I agree with, you're great. If you print something I disagree with, even if you're just trying to give a different perspective. Not saying you agree with it, you're just trying to show the fullness of a topic. Then all of a sudden, you're anti this, anti that. How does Christianity today yourself navigate this such angry society where they're just mad about everything? I know that was a long description, but you get the gist of what I'm saying.
I do, and I completely identify with what you're saying. I see it every day on Twitter, Facebook to some extent, and what you're describing is very real. And there's been actually a couple of different individuals who have written books on this recently. I know. I think it's Ed Stetzer has written a book recently. It's about Christians in an age of outrage.
Yes.
That's the name of it.
Yeah.
I have not read it, so I can't recommend it or not. But I know Ed and am familiar with his work, and think he oftentimes has a lot of important things to say. And I would say that might be a good place to turn to try to understand this dynamic further. I think Daniel Darling, who's with the National Religious Broadcasters, has a book out or just coming out that's on this topic too. So just trying to understand the dynamic, I would encourage a little bit of reading, kind of background. But as far as your question here, how do people like me at CT or Church Law and Tax sort of navigate it? It's hard. It can be a really painful process. We experienced it very much so in December with the set of editorials that CT Magazine published related to President Trump office. And we faced an enormous amount of backlash from that. We also, interestingly enough, received a great deal of positive reinforcement and encouragement about speaking into that moment. And so sometimes it's easy to see all the negative and think that's all that's being, weathered. And there typically is sort of another side to it too, that can be encouraging and helpful. But to your question, I think that when I talk about being an editor and a writer, and that being a skill set that you have to cultivate daily, I really wish that we could help readers do the same.
Yeah.
Cultivating their skills of reading, right? And thinking critically and being discerning. I kind of look to, and I've been spending a lot of time in the book of James here over the last month or so. James 1:19, being quick to listen, slow to speak. To me, that's just been so humbling. Thinking about the work I do, thinking about my platform, quote unquote, in social media and how I steward it well. And I really wish that people at an individual level could kind of take that and step back and really think about that hard and figure out, how do I apply that in my heart and my mind? And trying to be discerning about what I'm reading, where I'm reading it, reflecting on it before I react to it. And then when I think it's proper and important to share, doing so in a manner that demonstrates truth and love. With a posture of grace. That's the I guess the idealized me saying I wish that's the way it was, and it's not. I think that for me, in my professional work, I just understand it's just part of the job now. That's just how these things go. That's how it works. So I have a little bit of maybe a thicker skin for it now than I did when I first started in my career. And I think you have to learn over time. You're gonna publish things that people aren't gonna like.
Yep.
If you're getting into publishing to become liked, then you're not going to last very long, because it's just not the reality. You look at some of the best-selling books in the world, and there's always a movement of people who just do not like that book, despise it, et cetera, et cetera. And you see that within even just, the Christian publishing realm. There's always this movement that's in great opposition to, a book that a lot of people really resonate with. So it's just part of the job. You have to be prepared to face it, but you don't have to endure it alone, and you don't have to respond to all of it. There comes a point in time where you can say, I can pick and choose the kinds of conversations I'm going to have, and people that are well-meaning and intentioned, that have feedback that's maybe constructive. Hey, you want to engage that? That's good. If they're just being spiteful, if they're being derogatory, you don't have to engage that, and you can ignore it. And that's part of doing this, is getting experience to navigate that.
That's good. So if you get into this business, you like it. It's up and down. Maybe like 1 minute, like your next minute. All right, Matt, thank you. We had David on last week and Matt on this week, and what I want to do is publicly thank you, Matt, for the opportunities that you've given to me. You invited me to be on the clergy staff for Church Law and Tax, correct? Yeah.
That's right.
Church Law and Tax. A few of us are on an advisory board. The panel I was on Tuesday, Matt recommended me be on, a whole bunch of other stuff. So our Bethany family, David last week that we talked about helped me a lot in executive pastor realm. Matt's helped me a whole lot in this realm also. Honestly, to a crowd of people that probably would never know who I am, and I probably would never know who they are. So I just want to publicly thank you, Matt, just like I did with David. I appreciate you so much. And I'm glad we've started talking more over the years and conversing and the relationship building over the years. So I just want to thank you for helping us out today with all the information. Any closing words you want to give before we go out?
Well, you're very welcome. It was a real privilege for me to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. This was great for me, just to have the opportunity to think aloud on some of these questions that you posed, that are always kind of circulating in my mind, but I don't necessarily get a chance to articulate. And hopefully what I've shared has been beneficial for everyone that's joined us. But Nicholas, I thank you. I appreciate you. I think of our intersection as a divine appointment, just the leading of the Spirit, that we connected so many years ago, and have been able to connect and continue to work together in the ways that we have. And I look forward to so much more to come.
Yeah, me too. Hopefully this thing will go away so we can head down to Dallas in February again, but we'll see what happens.
That's right.
This whole pandemic. But thank you guys for tuning in. Please do us a favor. If you missed anything, go back and watch it again. Share it with your followers. Let them know about this. We'll probably put it up again so people can watch it later. Matt, you hang on. I'm going to end this video for them and we'll close out. All right, y'all. See you later. Bye.
Take care.